The night was silent, broken only by the hum of distant city lights, as Daniel whispered to himself, "What if everything we know is wrong?" His words echoed in the empty library, where ancient texts lined the shelves, untouched for decades. The air smelled of dust and fading ink, each page carrying secrets of forgotten civilizations. Daniel believed truth was buried here, somewhere between history and myth. He pushed his glasses higher, his eyes gleaming with obsession. Sarah, standing near the window, muttered, "You're chasing shadows, Daniel." Her voice trembled with caution, yet curiosity flickered in her tone. Daniel replied, "Every shadow hides a source of light. What if our origin isn't here at all?" Sarah crossed her arms, her reflection caught in the glass, uneasy but drawn to the question. The weight of silence filled the room again, yet both felt the presence of something greater pressing against them. Beyond the walls, the universe seemed to whisper a challenge neither could ignore. The rain outside thickened, each drop tapping against the glass like a ticking clock. Daniel muttered, "Time is running out for the truth to stay hidden." Sarah turned from the window, her voice sharp, "Or maybe it's running out for you." Daniel pulled a tattered journal closer, pages filled with scribbles from explorers long gone. He traced the lines, whispering, "They knew something we've forgotten." Sarah sighed. Every madman thinks history whispers to him. Yet, her eyes betrayed a spark of doubt. The storm rumbled, shaking the old panes. Lightning illuminated their faces, two seekers standing on the edge of revelation. Daniel's voice lowered to a near whisper. "If they left us clues, it means they wanted us to follow." Sarah walked toward him, her footsteps soft on the wooden floor. She said, "And if they wanted us not to?" He didn't look up, his obsession spilling into every word. "Secrets never rest forever, Sarah. They rot in silence until someone digs them up." Her brows furrowed, unease twisting her tone. "And sometimes digging gets you buried." The tension thickened as lightning rolled across the glass, illuminating symbols Daniel had sketched beside the journal. The journal's pages crumbled at the edges, yet Daniel treated them as sacred relics. He whispered, "Look at this, Sarah. The pattern repeats across centuries." She leaned over, reluctantly scanning the page. Her lips parted, words caught between disbelief and denial. It could be coincidence. Daniel's eyes glowed with intensity. Or proof that we are not from here. The thunder roared as if echoing his claim. Sarah shivered, not from the cold, but from the weight of a thought she dared not admit. Silence stretched between them until Sarah broke it. "If you're right, Daniel, then everything we know collapses." He replied without hesitation, "Then let it collapse. Truth is worth the ruin." She stepped back, shaken by his fervor. The storm pressed harder, windows rattling as if urging them toward discovery. Daniel placed his hand flat against the journal, steady as stone. "This is where it begins, Sarah. The question of who we really are." She whispered, "Or what we really are." Both stood frozen, bound by the gravity of a revelation still in shadow. The storm had passed, leaving the streets slick with rain as Daniel led Sarah through narrow alleys toward the museum's locked archives. He whispered, "Legends are history wrapped in riddles." Sarah hesitated, her voice sharp. "And riddles destroy those who chase them." His hand pressed against the iron gate, the weight of centuries echoing beneath his touch. The city's neon glow painted their faces in cold hues, the air damp with mystery. Sarah's unease deepened. "What are we looking for, Daniel?" He replied, "Not answers, but beginnings." The sound of dripping water filled the silence as the night closed in. Inside the museum, the air smelled of stone and dust. Daniel guided Sarah with a dim flashlight, shadows bending across marble statues. He murmured, "These myths, they all speak of sky beings shaping us." Sarah whispered, "Stories to scare children." Yet her eyes darted nervously, drawn to carvings of figures with elongated heads. Daniel said, "What if they're memories instead of stories?" The beam of light passed over ancient tablets, symbols etched deep. Sarah's voice cracked. "Some doors should stay shut." Daniel smiled faintly. and some were meant to be opened. The silence roared louder than the storm outside. The flashlight flickered as Daniel unrolled a fragile map stored behind glass. "Look here," he whispered, tracing with reverence. "Sights across continents, all aligned." Sarah leaned closer, breath held. "They could be coincidences," she muttered, her doubt thinning with every word. The map glowed faintly under the beam, lines pointing toward forgotten ruins. "Coincidence doesn't carve stone the same way on different worlds," Daniel replied. Her voice cracked. "Different worlds." He looked at her, eyes burning. "This is bigger than us." Her silence was answer enough. The weight of ancient secrets pressed down, heavier than the night. They reached a chamber where relics sat in glass cases, artifacts etched with patterns older than recorded history. Daniel pressed his hand against the glass. "They left a trail," he said. Sarah shook her head, voice trembling. "Or maybe we're making one up." Her reflection looked pale against the carved artifact. He whispered, "Truth hides in plain sight." She asked, "And if truth was never meant for us?" The tension wrapped tighter as silence returned, the air vibrating with the presence of something ancient. Both felt watched, though the room was empty, but for the shadows of history. The night deepened as Daniel uncovered a sealed drawer beneath the relic case, pulling out a fragment of stone, etched with spirals. His voice trembled. "This is older than any civilization we know." Sarah gasped, her fear sharpening. "Then it doesn't belong to us." He held it closer to the light, symbols glowing faintly as though alive. "Or it belongs to something that made us." Sarah's steps faltered, the chamber pressing inward with heavy silence. For a moment, their breaths were the only sound. Then she whispered, "Daniel, what if we're not supposed to see this?" The archives felt colder as Daniel whispered, "We're not the first to see this." Sarah's voice carried unease. "Then, where are the others who dared?" He tightened his grip on the glowing stone fragment, shadows crawling across his face. Somewhere in the distance, a door creaked. Both froze, hearts pounding against the silence. A figure appeared in the doorway, calm yet chilling, his presence commanding. Professor Whitmore stepped into the room, his measured voice breaking the tension. "You've wandered too far." Daniel clenched his jaw, defiance flaring. "Knowledge doesn't belong behind locked doors." Whitmore's smile was thin, his eyes concealing storms. "Some truths, Mr. Hale, can tear civilizations apart." Whitmore's shoes echoed as he circled the relics like a predator. "History is curated, not discovered," he said smoothly. Daniel's reply was fire. "History is buried under fear and control." Sarah's eyes flicked between them, her nerves fraying. Whitmore stopped before the glass case, his hand resting lightly atop it. "What you found belongs to no one," he said, voice soft yet heavy with threat. Daniel's grip tightened on the artifact. Sarah whispered, "Daniel, this isn't safe." Whitmore turned, his gaze fixed on her. "She's right, you should listen before curiosity burns you alive." Daniel slammed the artifact onto the table. "If it was meant to be hidden, why leave the trail?" His words cut through the silence. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. "Because every trail must end before it reaches the abyss." Sarah stepped forward, her voice trembling. "Why do you fear what we might learn?" Whitmore's expression hardened. "Because I know what happens when men like Daniel think they found destiny." Daniel's anger cracked into desperation. "We deserve the truth." Whitmore leaned close, his calm whisper sharper than thunder. "The truth will consume you before you can wield it." The silence fractured as alarms suddenly wailed, crimson lights flooding the chamber. Sarah gasped, stumbling back. Daniel shouted, "What did you do?" Whitmore remained calm, his silhouette glowing red. "You were never meant to be here," he said. Security footsteps thundered in the halls, closing in. Sarah grabbed Daniel's arm. "We need to go." He shook his head, eyes still locked on Whitmore. "Not without the truth." Whitmore smirked. "Then you'll lose more than your freedom tonight." The sirens grew louder, sealing their fate. Daniel and Sarah burst through a side corridor, the sound of alarms chasing them. "This way." Sarah cried, pulling him toward a hidden stairwell. Daniel clutched the artifact tightly, his breath ragged. Behind them, gods shouted, their flashlights slicing through the red haze. "We can't outrun this forever," Sarah panted. Daniel growled, "We don't have to, we just need to hold on to the proof." They pushed open a rusted door leading into the rain-soaked streets. The night air hit like freedom and fear combined, their escape fragile as the truth they carried. Dawn burned through fog as Daniel and Sarah climbed the narrow stairs of a weathered walk-up. The hallway smelled of rain and old wood, a place where memories stuck to paint. Elena opened the door with tired eyes and steadied breath. Daniel said, "We think you hold a piece of our path." Elena studied him, then the wrapped fragment in his hands. She said, "My mother vanished after men like you came asking questions." Sarah softened her voice. Sarah said, "We came to listen, not take." Elena stepped aside, and the room revealed boxes labeled in a careful hand. Daniel said, "We found echoes of her work in the museum." Elena flinched at the word museum, as if it were a bruise. She said, "She called it the Pale Star, and warned me to forget it." Sarah moved closer. Sarah said, "Forgetting did not keep you safe, did it?" The fog pressed the window while silence drew them inward. Elena lifted a tin from a shelf and placed a pendant on the table, a spiral etched in tarnished metal. She said, "She wore it on expeditions, said it matched stones from the desert." Daniel leaned in, breath catching at the pattern. Daniel said, "It mirrors the fragment." Sarah's fingers hovered, careful not to touch. Sarah said, "Why did she hide it?" Elena searched the window, as if the past might appear there. She said, "Because men listened at doors and vans idled at night." Daniel traced a sketch beside the pendant, lines forming a star path. He said, "This is more than folklore." Elena's voice thinned. She said, "Then it is more than I can carry alone." The room felt smaller, as if the walls leaned closer to hear. They followed Elena to a storage unit on the edge of the river, wind lifting grit across cracked concrete. The lock snapped free, and stale air rolled out like a kept secret. Daniel said, "These boxes were meant for someone brave." Sarah unsealed a crate, revealing notebooks stitched with thread. Sarah said, "She wrote like she was running." Elena pulled a folder, stamped with a red symbol. She said, "She feared that mark more than death." Daniel flipped pages, diagrams of genes intertwined with star maps. He said, "She thought our design arrived from the sky." Sarah steadied him with a look that warned and encouraged. Elena's voice softened. She said, "She wanted me to burn this, and I could not." The river roared like an oath beyond the thin metal walls. Footsteps scraped outside, measured and sure, then stopped. The door rolled up to reveal Whitmore framed in wet daylight. Professor Whitmore said, "You keep finding rooms meant to stay closed." Daniel stood, shoulders squared against the draft. Daniel said, "Truth does not ask your permission." Sarah moved nearer to Elena, a shield built of will and bone. Whitmore stepped forward with a velvet warning. Professor Whitmore said, "Return the materials, and I forget this trespass." Elena's hands shook over the folder. Elena said, "You followed my mother too." The name hung between them like a wire. Daniel said, "We take one box and walk away now." Whitmore's smile thinned into something colder as rain ticked on steel. Night returned as they reached a half-lit rooftop, city breathing below like a living map. "Why did I?" Elena placed a cassette recorder on the ledge and pressed play. A lullaby spilled out, not quite human notes bending like distant radio waves. Daniel said, "She recorded this in the field." Sarah closed her eyes to hear the cadence beneath melody. Sarah said, "It is not language, but it is a pattern." Daniel set the pendant beside the fragment, their spirals catching stray light. Daniel said, "It marks coordinates when mapped to the sky." Elena held the recorder with both hands, as if holding a final embrace. Elena said, "She sang it to me the night before she vanished." Wind scrolled through the dark, turning the music into a vow. The storm returned as Daniel, Sarah and Elena hid inside an abandoned rail station, its walls dripping with rust. Daniel paced, muttering, "The coordinates point to ruins buried under desert." Sarah snapped, "And Whitmore won't stop chasing us." Elena unwrapped the pendant, hands trembling. She said, "My mother said betrayal always comes from those closest." Daniel's jaw clenched, his thoughts circling. Sarah caught his eye and whispered, "You don't think it's me, do you?" He shook his head, but could not silence the doubt creeping into his chest. Distant footsteps echoed. The station swallowed their words, as if preparing to betray them itself. They lit a lantern, casting long shadows over maps spread on the floor. Daniel said, "The ruins in Morocco, the spirals align perfectly." Sarah pointed at another mark. Sarah said, "And these connect to Peru. It cannot be chance." Elena whispered, "My mother was taken for chasing the same path." Daniel rubbed his forehead, whispering, "We're tracing a pattern stitched into our blood." Sarah sighed, voice breaking. "Then why does it feel like a trap?" The lantern flickered, and for a heartbeat the symbols on the paper seemed to pulse, alive. A door groaned open, and a figure entered with slow, careful steps. It was Marcus, Daniel's old colleague, his smile carrying false warmth. Marcus said, "Still chasing ghosts, Daniel?" Daniel's heart stilled, memories of late nights and shared research flooding back. Daniel said, "Why are you here?" Marcus stepped closer, his coat dripping rain. Marcus said, "To save you from drowning in your obsession." Sarah's hand tensed near her pocket. Elena whispered, "You know him?" Daniel's reply was bitter. "I trusted him once." Marcus smirked. "And you still should if you want to live." The silence split with betrayal's sting. Marcus stepped into the lantern's glow, voice smooth. Marcus said, "The truth you're chasing will bury you." Daniel growled, "Or it will free us." Sarah interjected, "You're working with Whitmore, aren't you?" Marcus smirked, not denying it. Marcus said, "I protect what keeps the world from falling apart." Daniel advanced, fury igniting. Daniel said, "You protect lies." Elena clutched the pendant, whispering, "He followed my mother too." Marcus' mask slipped, eyes cold as steel. Marcus said, her silence kept balance, "Yours will too." His threat poisoned the room, leaving air heavy as chains. The station erupted in chaos as footsteps thundered outside. Guards stormed in, weapons raised, their shadows stretching tall. Sarah yelled, "It's a setup." Marcus' smirk deepened. Daniel shoved the pendant into Elena's hands. Daniel said, "Run now, whatever happens." Elena froze, fear anchoring her to the floor. Daniel's eyes locked with hers. Daniel said, "Your mother died to pass this on. Don't let it end here." Sarah grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her toward the tracks. Gunfire cracked the silence, sparks lighting the shadows. Daniel turned back to face Marcus, betrayal burning hotter than bullets. They drove until the city fell behind like a dying signal, and the desert rose, black against a bruised horizon. Daniel said, "The pendant and song give the same coordinates." Sarah watched the empty road and whispered, "Or the same trap." Elena held the recorder close, as if it could still warm her. She said, "My mother called the place Pale Star." Wind scraped sand across the asphalt, like whispered warnings. Daniel tightened his grip on the wheel and said, "If she named it, she wanted it found." Sarah studied the map's spiral and said, "She wanted it understood, not stolen." Silence gathered inside the car and listened to their fear. Elena said, "If we reach it, promise me we leave her name intact." Daniel nodded, a vow pressed between breaths. The first hint of dawn burned like an ember on the far ridge, patient and merciless. They reached a limestone escarpment where rock folded like old paper, and a narrow cut sank into shadow. Daniel said, "The spiral matches this canyon's curve." Sarah scanned the ridge and said, "We are not alone." A lone figure stepped from the heat haze, calm as a mirage given bones. Rhea said, "You carry a voice that should never have gone silent." Daniel steadied his breath and said, "You fed us clues and led us here." Rhea answered with a measured calm. Rhea said, "I warned you how the story ends." Elena stepped forward, voice shaking with hope. Elena said, "Did you know my mother?" Rhea's eyes softened at the name carried without sound. Rhea said, "She listened to the sky until the sky answered." The canyon exhaled a cold breath, and the earth felt awake. They descended into a chamber where the air smelled of cold stone and old rain. Daniel said, "These cuts are not natural." Sarah traced a groove and said, "They are measured like music." Rhea produced a narrow key and turned it within a hidden seam. The wall breathed, then opened into a room shaped like a seed. Elena's voice broke and mended in one breath. Elena said, "She was here." A recorder rested in a niche beside a spiral carved in metal. Daniel pressed play, and a voice unfurled, gentle and fierce at once. Miriam said, "If you hear me, the pattern is inheritance, not myth." Sarah closed her eyes and said, "She mapped code onto stars." The chamber pulsed with a hum that felt like memory finding its skin. Footsteps rattled the corridor like dice thrown by a careless god, and two silhouettes cut the light. Marcus said, "Still digging graves for the living." Whitmore's voice arrived smooth as varnish. Professor Whitmore said, "Return what is not yours." Daniel stepped between them and the spiral and said, "This was meant for all of us." Sarah lifted a data slate and said, "We copy, we leave, you walk away." Whitmore smiled at the arithmetic and said, "Balance requires sacrifice." Rhea moved to the wall and pressed her palm against a hidden plate. The floor shivered as a deeper vault unlocked like a final chord. Elena said, "She built a door under the door." The hum rose until silence felt loud. The vault opened to a cradle of artifacts arranged with unbearable care, as if placed by a hand that loved them. Daniel said, "This is not a tomb, it is a seed bank." Sarah leaned over a glass pod and said, "Encoded mattresses, layered like hymns." A final message blinked on a small device worn by time. Miriam said, "If you are my daughter, trust the pattern, not the keepers." Elena pressed a shaking hand to her mouth and said, "She left the sky inside a box." Rhea nodded toward a slender cylinder and said, "Proof lives quiet until it is asked to speak." Whitmore stepped closer, hunger hidden by grace. Professor Whitmore said, "Now you see why silence is mercy." Daniel lifted the cylinder and chose not to answer. The vault throbbed with a low hum as Daniel lifted the cylinder and faced Whitmore. Sarah steadied her breath, counting the pulses like a metronome for courage. Rhea said, "You still believe control can spare the world from wonder?" Professor Whitmore said, "Wonder is a fire that leaves only ash." Elena stepped beside the metal spiral and pressed the recorder to her heart. Elena said, "My mother died for this voice, and it will speak now." Marcus shifted nearer, smile tight as wire, eyes measuring every tremor. Daniel said, "No more guardianship by fear. The pattern belongs to everyone." The cylinder bloomed with cold light, and the chamber felt wider than earth. Symbols rose like auroras, tracing constellations across the stone. For the first time, Whitmore's confidence flickered, almost human. Marcus lunged, and Sarah moved like a snapped line, blocking his reach with precise force. Marcus said, "You never learned when to stop." Sarah said, "I learned who to stop." Whitmore advanced with a velvet command that cut like glass. Professor Whitmore said, "Shut it down, or I bury you in the dark." Rhea slid between threats and circuitry, hands dancing over a hidden panel. Rhea said, "You brought locks." She left keys. Elena pressed play, and the lullaby poured into the vault like dawn water. Daniel said, "Let the pattern choose its keeper." The chamber shimmered, and the door behind Whitmore sealed with a hiss. Fear finally found his polished voice and cracked it. The cylinder opened like a flower taught by physics and grief, releasing a lattice of light. A voice rose, calm and unafraid. Miriam said, "Seed not origin, memory not myth, guidance not rule." Daniel trembled, hearing a map written in music and bone. Sarah said, It pairs stellar coordinates to Alala's. It is a ledger of becoming. Rhea nodded, reverent and fierce at once. Rhea said, they tended us until we could tend ourselves. Elena wept without sound, each tear a vowel of recognition. Marcus stared, the lie he served dissolving under proof. Professor Whitmore looked away, as if mercy were brighter than he could bear. Silence settled like snowfall after artillery, and choice arrived with it. Daniel said, we release the record in full, with context, with care. Sarah met his eyes and measured the cost. Sarah said, truth without scaffolding becomes a weapon. Rhea placed a drive into Daniel's palm, steady as a benediction. Rhea said, split it 3 ways, let no single hand hold the sun. Elena breathed, then found steel beneath sorrow. Elena said, her name will not be erased again. Professor Whitmore sagged, authority leaking away like heat. Whitmore said, what you free will never return to its cage. Daniel said, nor should it. They climbed into daylight, where wind combed the dunes like patient hands. Daniel transmitted the split archives to distant custodians, and closed the channel. Daniel said, if we vanish, the truth will not. Sarah watched the horizon as clouds drifted like slow ships. Sarah said, we carry the fire, not the cage. Elena placed the pendant on a cairn of pale stones, and let the lullaby finish without fear. Elena said, be found, mother. Rhea smiled at a future she would never fully see. Rhea said, seeds know their season. Behind them, the vault slept, but the world had awakened.